Good morning and welcome to Rising. We've got another great show for you today. It is Wednesday morning and Marianne Williamson is with me once again. Hello, Marianne.
Hello, Robby. Well, the chaos of the Trump administration continues unabated. This time the president has begun a global trade war, so we'll have a lot to talk about today. To begin with, what's on your radar, Robby?
We will have a lot to talk about today. Let's get right to it. I say, leave Thomas Massie alone. That's my message to President Donald Trump, who unfortunately has picked a fight with the deservedly popular congressman from Kentucky. Trump tore into Massie on Truth Social on Tuesday, writing, "Now and virtually on every other vote, he's a very simple no. Thomas Massie is a grandstander, and the great people of Kentucky are going to be watching a very interesting primary in the not-too-distant future." Now, that's twice this week that Trump has threatened to primary Massie. Why? Because the congressman is a holdout on the continuing resolution. Actually, he voted against it just yesterday. That would have reauthorized federal spending at current levels in order to avoid a government shutdown. That happened. That vote took place yesterday. Thomas Massie, a lone no vote on the GOP side. His reasoning is very simple. Now is the time for Republicans to do what they have promised to do for years and to actually vote to reduce government spending and eliminate needless government programs. On strategic grounds, he's absolutely correct. Republicans love to promise that, of course, they're going to cut the government in the future, but first they have to continue recklessly spending until they win another election. That's what their voters are forced to put up with. Vague assurances that the tough, serious decision to actually rein in the federal government, that's coming at some indeterminate point in the future after the GOP has won sufficient political power. Well, look, I've got news for the GOP. The situation right now is as good as it's ever going to get. Usually the party that controls the White House loses seats in the midterms. And if the Republicans lose basically any seats at all, control of the House will flip back to the Democrats. The Senate's fairly safe. The White House itself is a toss-up. The presidency has now gone back and forth between Republicans and Democrats in the last 3 cycles. So that's a long way of saying the GOP's current trifecta might not last anyway and is more than sufficient to proceed with an actual bill that reins in spending. Could the GOP suffer politically if cuts are made? Well, yeah, perhaps. But they could also suffer politically if they don't deliver on their promises. I would remind them that the public supports the elimination of waste, fraud, and abuse and is positively disposed toward what DOJ is doing. But DOJ and Elon can't do it all. Congress must act. To his credit, Thomas Massie understands that. So does Senator Rand Paul, who has signaled he's in the same camp as Massie. We're going to be interviewing him later today on Rising. Looking forward to that. They are principled. They want to actually do what so many other people in their party only talk about doing. And for this, Trump wants to primary Massie? I mean, good luck with that. The man is very popular in his district. He's shrugged off previous challenges. He's not afraid to take on mainstream orthodoxies, like when he criticized endless support for Israel and called for non-intervention in the Gaza conflict. That earned him opposition from AIPAC, but it did not have any effect on his reelection. That's because Massie isn't just another rhino, Republican in name only, or some anti-Trump establishment type like Liz Cheney. He's a libertarian-inclined America First conservative, and he means it. And look, if other Republicans really, really disagree with his stance on the CR, okay, fine. It's their prerogative. But Trump going out of his way to attack Massie is just unnecessary. It's very extra in the extreme. It's an attack on someone who actually wants to enact the America First agenda. As the Daily Wire's Matt Walsh put it, you can disagree with Massie about the CR, that's fine, but the idea that he needs to be ousted from Congress is just asinine. You will not find very many elected Republicans who have more consistently gotten most issues right over the past 5 years. Go ahead. Try to come up with a list. Give me 10 Republicans with a better track record. Anyone supporting the call for Massie to be primaried should be able to list at least 10 elected Republicans who have a better voting record. Go ahead then. Let's see it. Or take it from former Congressman Ron Paul, someone of a similar mindset.
He states his position by the way he votes. Everybody knows it, and most of them respect him for it. And to gang up on him and say, well, we got to get rid of him because he's helping the Democrat. You know, it's preposterous. It's so sad to see that.
Now, Trump has some fairly decent political instincts, but he's getting this one wrong. Massie understands what the MAGA base wants. unlike so many Republicans who whine about reckless government spending when they're out of power and then won't lift a finger to stop it when they actually have power, Massie means business. As he himself put it, POTUS is spending his day attacking me in Canada. The difference is Canada will eventually cave. And as I said, Marianne, we're going to be interviewing Senator Rand Paul a little bit later, who's of a similar disposition. Look, you and I may have different views on, what level of government spending is appropriate, but surely you must concede that Republicans who just talk, when they have no ability to actually do anything, oh yeah, we're going to rein in government, we're going to balance the budget, we're going to do all these things. Okay, now they have the ability to do it, and it's not even on their radar. It's not even a possibility that they would seriously do it now. They're like, no, we got to win another election, then we'll do it. Who's fooled by this?
I'm interested in things that are far more fundamental than that, and those have to do with the pillars of our freedom. And that pillar, in this case, is the co-equal branches of government. So I'm absolutely thrilled to see that there are now 2 Congress people, 2 Republicans who are willing to stand up to this president. And I would think that you and any American would be upset to see the president so apoplectic that anyone would dare disagree with him. The idea that the president himself has clearly no respect for the co-equal branch, which is the U.S. Congress. So for that reason alone, sure, if Massie wants to stand up to the president, good for him. And I say the same thing about Rand Paul. Not that I agree with their position specifically, that's not the point. The fact that they know that, hey, I'm part of a co-equal branch of government and you back off.
The rest of the Republican congressional delegation, they want to give up their ability to fight, to battle the president at all. They're voting to give up their power to control tariffs at all. They don't want to govern. This is so frustrating.
You
to
don't
me.
have to tell us
And
that.
it's true on both. It's true to some degree on both sides. The members of Congress increasingly just they want to be TV stars. They just want to be on cable news talking. They don't want to do anything. That whatever the president wants to do, obviously Democrats in opposition in Congress want to, I guess a fight. They're not really doing anything. But if the president is a Democrat, then congressional Democrats, they're not a co-equal branch. It's whatever the president says, and vice versa. Congress, even though our founders, and you like to talk about the strength of our founding documents and the vision the creators of this country had, and I so appreciate that and so agree with that, they would be falling down, horrified by how Congress, the main branch in their view of legislating, of rulemaking, of governing, doesn't want to govern.
Well, I certainly agree that the founders are rolling over in their graves about Congress, but I also believe that the founders are rolling over in their graves about this president. But, there have also been times when there were Democratic presidents, and I felt that the Democrats in Congress allowed him far too much power, definitely with some of these wars that we've been fighting over the last
Congress declares the wars. What happened to that?
Well, what happened to that? You're absolutely correct. So we are seeing things from I won't say your president because I think that's terrible, our president at this point. This is behavior that is absolutely disrespectful towards the way our system is supposed to work. But once again, this is how Trump has been acting on a lot of things. So he's attacking now a Republican congressman. He's also attacking Canada. He's starting a global trade war. This man is out of control. He's our own Mad King George. And I don't think the American people are very happy about it.
Well, I'm happy with a lot of the things that he's doing, but I am not happy with the trade war taking place, and neither is the stock market or the economy. Nobody's quite happy about that, and as I've said before, I really do worry about the rest of the Trump agenda coming undone as he makes these tariff moves that even a lot of MAGA people are not thrilled about. But we're going to talk more about Canada specifically when I hear what's in your memo, Marianne. That's coming up next, and then Rand Paul interview a little bit later. Stay tuned. Marianne, what's in your memo?
Thank you, Robby. At the Oscars in 1999, a classic act had the entire nation laughing. The late comic Robin Williams came out on the stage with a hilarious bit called Blame Canada, Blame Canada, Blame Canada. Everything's gone wrong since Canada came along, blame Canada. There were lyrics that referred to serious issues like who gets to own Celine Dion, and it was all one big joke, see, because obviously we didn't have a beef with Canada. The idea of blaming Canada for anything was so absurd that the song was received on both sides of the border as a very funny joke. Well, thanks to our bully-in-chief now occupying the White House, it isn't funny anymore. The United States is waging economic warfare on Canada, And even worse, the president is doubling down on his menacing message that Canada should become our 51st state. President Trump said that would make all of their problems, tariffs and everything else, he said, totally disappear. Canada's having none of that. And why would they? They're the ones with universal health care, not us. They're the ones whose schools come in fourth in international rankings, while we come in at 22. They're the ones who, according to the U.S. News and World Report, rank in the top 5 internationally in terms of quality of life, while the United States ranks anywhere between 13 and 22. Maybe that's why President Trump is insisting on Canada becoming the 51st state. Many assumed it was a joke at first, but POTUS has been deadly serious. So much so that their newly elected Prime Minister, Mark Carney, said this.
America is not Canada.
Les États-Unis, ce n'est
And
pas
Canada
le Canada.
never, ever
le Canada
will be part of
ne
America
fera jamais
in
partie des
any
États-Unis
way, shape, or
d'une
form.
façon ou d'une autre.
Trump justifies his aggressive behavior by saying that Canada is responsible for a large amount of undocumented migrants and a significant amount of fentanyl coming into the United States. But neither claim is supported by fact. 1% of the number of the people who crossed into the United States came through our northern border in 2024. Moreover, only 1% of the fentanyl in our country came from Canada, only enough to fill a small suitcase, in fact. In fact, by some estimations, more drugs are flowing from the United States to Canada than from Canada to the United States. Our relationship with Canada has been a good one, almost like cousins. We've enjoyed the world's most comprehensive trading relationship, supporting millions of jobs in both countries. We've been each other's largest trade partners, with $2.7 billion worth of goods and services crossing the border each day. Most economists would say, you don't mess with that. Take the win. Yet the president doesn't want that win, claiming erroneously that Canada has been taking advantage of us for years. So he placed a 25% tariff on Canadian steel and aluminum. Then Canada responded with equal tariffs of American electricity, to which Trump responded with a threat of 50% tariffs on steel and aluminum. So this was yesterday, and after several tense hours, both sides backed down. But in no way are things now running smoothly, particularly because those tariffs were initiated at midnight last night. This is the president's MO, but Canada will not cave. It understands that the economies of both nations are deeply interdependent, and a threat to one carries an inherent threat to the other. Nor will it ever cede sovereignty, no matter what the threat. Let's watch what White House spokesman Caroline Leavitt, in typical let's deny the facts fashion, described all that chaos.
The president has continued to deliver on his promises to the American people. According to new polling that was released at the beginning of this week by CBS News, an overwhelming 70% of Americans said that President Trump is following through on what he pledged to do during his historic campaign.
But this is not a win for anyone. It is dangerous. 25 years ago, we joked about blaming Canada. Today, we're giving Canada a very good reason to seriously blame us.
Look, I agree largely with you, Marianne, that we should not have conflict with our northerly neighbors. There is a lot about Canada to like, including that they value economic freedom to a greater degree than us in some cases. Actually, they've been, by libertarian organizations, routinely rank Canada above the U.S. in terms of having less regulated markets, actually. So far from being some kind of progressive dystopia, Canada is in some ways less progressive than our country in ways I approve of. I want to have good relations with Canada. I don't want to do the tariffs. I've said that very clearly. I think the tariffs will be toxic for our economy and ultimately hamper the rest of Trump's agenda, which I do agree with. I want to trade with Canada. Now, I will say that Canada, I don't want it to be the 51st state because that would give more Senate votes to liberals because people there are more liberal. I would be terrified to they're hostile, their government, to our First Amendment values, the kind of debanking and arresting of protesters that happened during COVID was, I think, just horrifying. And that's most of the American rights animus toward Canada is now based on how the truckers' protests and the COVID stuff was handled. I don't want people who were that in favor of lockdowns and violating speech of COVID dissidents to have any say in our governance. But I am happy to trade with them and be neighborly and have good economic policies with respect to Canada.
You know, for me, hearing all of your thoughts and your pronouncements about Canada, for me the point is, you're not Canadian. It's none of your business. They are a sovereign nation. That's the point here. This is an imperialistic threat that our president is making, and it's not good for Canada, obviously, but I don't think it's good for us.
One note I had for you, though, Marianne, that performance of Blame Canada that you referred to. So that was Robin Williams performing the song from South Park.
Yeah, I know.
Which is a terrific satire. I love South Park. And
right, many people let me know that actually after I had already written the piece, but I had first seen it on the Oscars, and of course with a great affection for Robin Williams. It would have been considered inconceivable decades ago that we were having a serious argument with Canada over anything. And this, once again, is the bullying of our president. And a lot of people say about things like this, oh, so many people told me who voted for him, oh, Marianne, don't take him seriously. He just says things. He doesn't just say things. He means these things. And, of course, as everybody's saying, during his first administration, there were people, sane people, sophisticated adults in the room who were keeping him from his most outrageous impulses. And today, there are no guardrails, just as people have been told that there wouldn't. And I think there are a lot of people who voted for him who have buyer's remorse. I have to believe that, because I don't think that the American people appreciate a president who goes around literally bullying the world.
I mean, I don't see a lot of evidence about that, and I think the coming off of the guardrails is largely a good thing. But, what can I say? I agree with a lot of the things Trump does, and I don't agree with everything. I'm not like a mindless pro-Trump partisan, so I'm not going to defend every single thing he does. I think the conflict with Canada with respect to the tariffs is going to end up hurting us just as much as it hurts them, and it is the number one concern of Americans that prices are too high. Americans just want the government to hands off the economy so that it runs relatively smoothly, and we have prices brought under control, and we have general prosperity and good trading relationships with our neighbors. Occasionally, they might need to get smacked into line for some reason, and we've got to be cognizant of the threat of China. But just escalating everything at all times is, you're right, not good policy. And Trump seems to know that, because then when the stock market crashed, he immediately said, we're not going to do the tariffs. And then there was recovery, and he said, okay, we will do them. And then it crashed again. So come on, guys, you know what's going to happen.
Let's remember, this is not just tariffs against Canada at this point. As of midnight last night, we're talking about a global trade war, because he's also talking, not just talking, he is imposing these tariffs also on Europe and on Australia. And Europe, as well as Canada, has made it clear that they will be placing reciprocal tariffs on us. So we're off and running.
I mean, I'm glad to hear.
And also, when you say Americans just want, you can't speak for all Americans. You can speak for your crowd, but that's about half of us. So not all Americans want the U.S. government to just take their hands off and let unfettered capitalism in its soulless, unethical form simply have its way with us. Now,
why are you? I mean,
what all of us want.
This is interesting. Like, I am glad to hear Democrats so exercised about tariffs being bad. Correct, but tariffs are bad because they're a violation of free market economics and free trade.
Well,
that's what's bad about them. So I'm glad to hear Democrats concede that they're bad, but doesn't that also just suggest then that the entire progressive economic project is bad?
No, first of all, it doesn't. But secondly, I think most people, both on the left and the right, recognize that there are places where, once again, scalpel rather than hatchet, there can be in negotiations places where an aspect of protectionism and an aspect of tariffs can make sense. It's just this broadside on everybody's economy but ours, which is the problem I think any American should have on the left or the right. And of course, what the American people need to wake up to is that this is going to hurt American businesses, American consumers. And apparently the phones were ringing off the hook with people in the White House yesterday, business leaders, what the hell are you doing? An editorial in Wall Street Journal, claiming that this is the most absurd, insane thing that they've ever heard of. More and more Americans are waking up to the chaos of this administration and the fact that this president, certainly on the issue of economics, but also on the issue of the U.S. Constitution, doesn't even know what he's talking about, or at very least does not care.
Up next, Secretary of State Marco Rubio says that the government has the right to withdraw an individual's green card. We will discuss that very controversial action, detention of a pro-Palestinian activist student at Columbia. Stay with us. One former Ivy League student is currently the center of a fiery legal battle. That is Mahmoud Khalil, permanent legal resident and recent Columbia University graduate. He will be appearing in court today. Now, immigration officers arrested him last weekend. The Trump administration is trying to deport him. This is part of an administration initiative to crack down on what they consider Hamas-supporting protesters. But it's important to note, Khalil has not been charged with a crime.
But a federal judge ordered a pause on that move as he reviews legal challenge. Last spring, Khalil led campus protests against Israel and the war in Gaza. Here's Secretary of State Marco Rubio explaining the situation.
When you come to the United States as a visitor, which is what a visa is, which is how this individual entered this country, as on a visitor's visa, okay, you are here as a visitor. We can deny you that visa. We can deny you that if you tell us when you apply, hi, I'm trying to get into the United States on a student visa. I am a big supporter of Hamas, a murderous, barbaric group that kidnaps children, that rapes teenage girls, that takes hostages, that allows them to die in captivity, that returns more bodies than live hostages. If you tell us that you are in favor of a group like this, and if you tell us when you apply for your visa, and by the way, I intend to come to your country as a student and rile up all kinds of anti-Jewish student, anti-Semitic activities, I intend to shut down your universities. If you told us all these things when you applied for a visa, we would deny your visa. I hope we would. If you actually end up doing that, once you're in this country on such a visa, we will revoke it. And if you end up having a green card, not citizenship, but a green card as a result of that visa while you're here in those activities, we're going to kick you out. It's as simple as that. This is not about free speech. This is about people that don't have a right to be in the United States to begin with. No one has a right to a student visa. No one has a right to a green card, by the way.
Khalil's legal team wants to move him to New York. One of his attorneys called the idea of Khalil being aligned with Hamas false and preposterous. Sources told the New York Times that Rubio was relying on a provision of the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1952. The relevant provision reads, quote, an alien whose presence or activities in the United States, the Secretary of State, has reasonable ground to believe would have potentially serious adverse foreign policy consequences for the United States is deportable. Now, neither Rubio nor the administration have publicly pointed to the specific legal basis for Khalil's arrest. However, Trump wrote in part on Truth Social this week, this is the first arrest of many to come. We know there are more students at Columbia and other universities across the country who have engaged in pro-terrorist, anti-Semitic, anti-American activity, and the Trump administration will not tolerate it. Per the New York Times, Khalil has called himself a negotiator and a spokesman for Columbia University apartheid divestment. That same group last August posted on Instagram that they were, quote, Westerners fighting for the total eradication of Western civilization. Columbia University was a major hub of pro-Palestinian protesting last spring.
Democrats on the Senate Judiciary Committee are pushing back on Trump's initiative. They wrote on X, ICE just detained a lawful permanent resident and recent grad student in the middle of the night because Mahmoud exercised his First Amendment rights in a way Donald Trump doesn't like. Straight up authoritarianism.
The New York Post ran a story on how a Zionist organization was preparing a list of foreign students who were, quote, pro-Hamas in the hopes that Trump would deport them. Political commentator Ann Coulter, who's known for being a hardliner on immigration, responded to that story, writing on X, there's almost no one I don't want to deport, but unless they've committed a crime, isn't this a violation of the First Amendment?
Congresswoman Ilhan Omar wrote on Blue Sky, utterly outrageous, this is un-American. The forced disappearance of Mahmoud Khalil for nothing more than a constitutionally protected speech is a clear assault on First Amendment rights and a blatant act of authoritarianism.
CNN analyst Scott Jennings, on the other hand, wrote on X, Mahmoud Khalil's group wants to eradicate Western civilization and foment unrest in the United States. President Trump and Senator Rubio are well within their legal rights to deport this radical. We are either going to stand up or become Europe. I'm 100% behind the president.
You know, Robby, I am Jewish, and I am deeply concerned, as I think every American should be, about anti-Semitism in the United States and anti-Semitism particularly on American campuses. However, we must be dedicated to the rule of law. Without that, we are not a free people. Everything that Rubio there said, I didn't have a disagreement with. The disagreement comes from the fact that he has not made a case, he has not even presented evidence that the things he said apply specifically to Khalil. And that's the point. We must be very, very clear about the nuance and the distinction between pro-Palestinian and pro-Hamas. Just as we must be clear about the distinction between anti-Israel and anti-Jew. So I think that both sides have some points, but the government, when the government starts disappearing people, you just start taking someone from their home in the middle of the night, and for days, neither his lawyer nor his wife even knew where he was. That's not okay in the United States. And so the government needs to present its evidence and its case. Even when you were talking about the group that said they wanted the eradication of Western civilization, what part did Khalil make in that? And there are a lot of people who have been very clear that his is a measured tone. Yes, he and I disagree on some things, but the things that I know of that we disagree on are within the purview of constitutionally protected free speech. So I'm glad that now he's in court, and I just say the government needs to make its case. Marco Rubio and the president, for that matter, do not have the right to just start disappearing. My father always told us when we were kids, if they can do it to anybody, they can do it to you.
Yeah, we're going to broadly agree on this one. I am a strong supporter of free speech and the First Amendment, both in the constitutional sense and just as an ethos by which Western civilization, which you're saying we're defending Western civilization, well, one of the most praiseworthy features of Western civilization, of our Enlightenment heritage, is our respect for dissent, provocative, even hateful, who we all disagree about what is hateful, the right to express those ideas. Now, I don't know, and it's a little bit above my pay grade to say what exactly laws apply to him as a visa holder versus a green card holder, but I always remind people that the First Amendment is not actually saying these are the people who get these rights. It is
Anybody
a restriction on the government's behavior. It is saying the government may not infringe upon these rights. But in either case, we want to allow for dissent. And when you start going into, support for terrorism, even the statute about that is very clear, right? Providing material support. If he raised money and sent it to Hamas, that will be a different story. If he's in communication with Hamas terrorists or something, that will be a different story. Just expressing views, and you're right, the evidence hasn't even been supported, exactly. But if it's supporting views that align with Hamas, our own government has urged Israel to negotiate with Hamas in order to release the more hostages, and I support that. When I talk about Ukraine and Russia, I'm often accused of oh, you sound like a Putin puppet because you agree with Russia that the war should come to an end. So okay, but I'm saying that's the same thing. So is that and then
I know what you're saying.
The way this gets justified, I was reading the Free Press. And an official told them, he was mobilizing support for Hamas, spreading anti-Semitism in a way that is contrary to the foreign policy of the U.S. Well,
we don't owe it.
What is the foreign we all disagree about what the foreign policy should be. There's disagreement even within the own government. So
I want to stop on that one actually for a moment, Robby. This is where you're talking about the line into authoritarianism. If Americans or anyone who's here feels that they are not safe to disagree with the foreign policy of the United States, that's an authoritarian government. That's not a free democratic society.
We need to debate the foreign policy.
Yeah, hello. We don't have a king.
This is speech relating to a conflict between a foreign terrorist organization and a foreign government. And it is a bit weird to say that, that speech is not, what the U.S.'s policy should be with respect to this conflict happening over there is an important political topic that should be very protected and debated, and there's division and disagreement on how to handle the issue.
No, there's a distinction there, though. It's not just that Hamas is contrary to the foreign policy of the United States. It's that Hamas is a terrorist organization. Right. So that distinction does matter. But I think that where you and I agree is really important here. Let the government present its evidence. Yeah. We must be ruled. We must be a government.
Also, they clearly initially, when they picked him up, and I don't like the idea of, it's one thing to say, your visa's going to expire now because you violated some and another to say we're going to grab you in the middle of the night and then later make it that's exactly. Again, it's not a crime that they said he made. and they clearly thought he was here on just the visa. But he's the green card holder. So he's married to an American citizen. We all understand that people in those circumstances get significant, if not the exact same, have significantly more rights than just someone who's on a student visa. So this is very concerning. This is very troubling. I don't think we want to go down this road, and I would urge the administration to.
And I would urge all of you to know that this is one where, just as Robby and I have some really fundamental agreements on this one, this should not in any way, shape, or form be a left-right issue. We have to remember in so many things there, we all have our desires of what we wish to see regarding Israel, regarding Palestine, and so forth. But once again, the dedication to those underlying principles, you and I agree on them, and I hope that all Americans.
Government officials citing national security concerns is the way our rights start getting stripped one by one. Yours, mine, and everybody else's.
That's right. That's right. We don't disappear
do it,
people in the United States.
All right, coming up next, maybe, just maybe, Tulsi Gabbard was a little prescient about what was going to happen in Syria after Assad was ousted. Let's discuss. Stay tuned. Was Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard right about Syria, which is currently experiencing very severe violence? The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights says that 1,300 people have died, including 1,000 civilians.
Militias affiliated with Syria's new government, led by Ahmad al-Sharaa, have killed most of the 1,000 civilians, at least according to the observatory. The United Nations said yesterday that sectarianism was appearing to be driving the unrest and civilian killings. The country has been undergoing a civil war for 14 years.
Why all of this violence now, you ask? Well, of course, in December, rebel forces overthrew the country's 13-year leader, Bashar al-Assad. Now, in the past, critics have smeared Gabbard as an Assad apologist and sympathizer throughout her career. Some of her warnings about what might happen if Assad were toppled, I think, are proving to be true. Here she was in January during her confirmation hearing.
I shed no tears for the fall of the Assad regime, but today we have an Islamist extremist who is now in charge of Syria, as I said, who danced on the streets to celebrate the 9/11 attack, who ruled over Idlib with an Islamist extremist governance, and who has already begun to persecute and kill and arrest religious minorities like Christians in Syria.
I understand.
Why that should be acceptable to anyone is beyond me.
It shouldn't
is
be.
certainly
And
not
I
in our
understand.
interests.
Greek Foreign Minister Georgios Geropetris told Fox News Digital that Europe and the U.S. need to be cautious of this new regime. Unless the new government includes religious minorities in governance, then the international community will have to keep the sanctions. It's also a clip from Trump in 2015 talking about the Syrian conflict. Here he was.
The problem is the other side of Assad. We have no idea who they are. They probably are racist. I'm saying, are we better off with Assad? We have no idea who these people are. We give them weapons, we give them ammunition, we give them everything. Aaron, we have no idea who. I mean, maybe it's worse than Assad. So what are we doing? Why are we involved?
Now, the Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces, which the United States does back, they came to an agreement with the new government this week. That deal would integrate all civil and military institutions into the new Syria. Secretary of State Marco Rubio welcomed that deal, said the U.S. supports a credible, non-sectarian government. I wanted to discuss this, Marianne, because, people like Tulsi and others, get smeared as being in league with or apologizing for, a dictator like Assad. No, Assad, very bad man. No, just like she said, no one is shedding tears. The violence and murder that he was responsible for is terrible. But how many times do we have to learn the lesson that we get involved, we contribute to regime change in one of these Middle Eastern countries, and the outcome ends up being worse? That's exactly what we discovered in Iraq, in Libya, where ISIS was marching through the streets afterwards, terrorists that want to kill Americans, that inspire attacks against Americans within our own country. ISIS has the power to do that, not Assad or Gaddafi or Hussein. I'm under no, illusions about these individuals, but we have to be clear-eyed about what is within the realm of possibility and the violence we are seeing. Marianne, we spoke to an expert on Syria on Monday, Niall and I did, who has family there, describing scenes of absolute horror of family members hiding in their villages, hiding in the mountains, hiding behind bushes as these violent terrorist militias come through, kill all the men, steal all their things, and move on to the next town. This is horrifying.
Everything that Tulsi said there was absolutely correct. And the scenes of horror, people being killed in churches, machetes, beheadings, it's all absolutely disgusting. Now let's remember, Assad was also known for violence against his own people. So I think the criticism of Tulsi was that she was treating him with respect, almost like he was some good guy. It was a bad guy versus bad people. And there's to some extent what the president was saying there as well. At the same time, I don't think it's correct to compare this to something like Libya. This was not an actual declared regime change. This is just, the Syrian people are brilliant people. This is just one of the great tragedies. And people like even like when you started just now, she was smeared. I think there's some things we just need to talk about in the sense of what are we going to do? What can we do as Americans? Not every conversation has to be contextualized, even for the sake of good TV. Not every conversation needs to be contextualized as in, well, you guys, especially since the past is the past. And I just hope, I think Tulsi has it right. And I hope that she and the president, for the sake of the Syrian people, can come up with policies that hopefully will be helpful at this tragic time.
Yeah, or just say, and I know this is not satisfying for a lot of people who want positive developments in that part of the world, but when we send weapons or we get involved and it ends up being no better or even worse, that makes me say, well, it's sad, but it's not our problem. Like, let's not be involved. If we're only going to make it no better or worse, we should just not be involved. And you're right, it wasn't, the U.S. did not contribute to the regime change in Syria to the same extent as Iraq or Libya. We did have crippling sanctions against the Assad regime that helped the rebels eventually overcome. Those sanctions are still in place and are now against the rebel government.
It was Russia neglecting him, abandoning him, saying no more, that apparently brought down the Assad regime.
Yeah. It's really terrible, and obviously there are all these different ethnic, religious groups that are part of Syria, and look, and they might have to make deals with the government in order to protect their own people, have some kind of representation. It's going to be messy. I hope they do that. The Alawites are the groups that, again, I was learning all of this on Monday as we were interviewing this expert. The Alawites are the group that are really being persecuted right now by this new regime that is just so murderous. So it is truly horrifying, and will lead to further destabilization because people fleeing the conflict for the last decade from Syria entering Europe has helped inspire this significant backlash we're seeing in Europe, mirroring our own backlash in the U.S. against mass immigration. Many immigrants who come in are perfectly upstanding people who want to contribute to the new country, but there are also concerns about terrorism being fostered in Europe if too many of these people come in, and their fears are stronger than our fear. We have a whole ocean between us and
Arab nations in the region as well, who had made their, I wouldn't call it peace, but had made their deals, made their agreements with the Assad regime. So I'm sure that they themselves, because this isn't just a threat to Europe, this is a threat to all of the countries that are in the region. This is good, obviously, for no one. So I think we're still in a not a wait and see, but a information gathering phase here when it comes to Syria, and it's going to have to be an international response. It can't just, obviously it cannot just be the United States. But I think that there are many ways in which I think that we see this throughout the Middle East. We see it with Israel, we see it with Gaza. There's a stepping up on the part of Arab nations that is absolutely necessary in order for this next phase to unfold in a way that's positive for the world.
Very much so. Coming up next on Rising, Senator Rand Paul will join us to talk about everything going down on Capitol Hill. Stay tuned. Congress is trying to pass a continuing resolution that averts a government shutdown but fails to advance conservative priorities like balancing the budget and eliminating waste. Senator Rand Paul thinks that might be a big mistake. Now, for context, House Republicans scrambled Tuesday to pass this bill to fund the government through September 30th. Those 7 Democrats voted no, as well as a defector, Thomas Massie, from the Republican side. The GOP-drafted bill made it with just Massie expressing opposition to that, and now it's up to the Senate. With a razor-thin majority, Senate Republicans will need all the votes they can get. Paul is a staunch fiscal conservative. He has already voiced opposition to the stopgap measure for not doing enough to cut the deficit. The legislation that passed in the House would increase defense spending by $6 billion and also boost funding for border security and cut non-defense programs by $13 billion. Joining us now to talk about all of this and what could motivate actual revisions to the way government funding is made is Kentucky Senator Rand Paul. We are so glad to have you on Rising once again, Senator.
Thanks for having me.
So you, Senator, have a lot of credibility from the limiting government side, perfect score from Liberty Republicans. You've been talking about cutting government for years and years and years, and now Elon Musk is identifying things to cut. Donald Trump was talking about it in his joint address, and yet, despite Republicans having more power over our government than they've had in years and years and years, it's going to be kicking the can down the road and not actually cutting these programs. Are they being honest with the American people about the fact that these cuts will not actually be permanent, the things Elon is doing, unless you all vote to make them so?
The bill we're going to have to face this week will be continuing spending at the same level. These are the levels that were determined in December between Democrats and Republicans. These are the Biden spending levels. We know one result that will come from these spending levels, a $2 trillion deficit. So these spending levels exceed revenue by $2 trillion. There's no escaping that. So there's nothing conservative about these spending levels. No fiscal conservative should support this because it's going to borrow $2 trillion. That was the principle which once upon a time united all fiscal conservatives. So I will oppose it. I will propose an amendment today, and I'm hoping to get a vote on it. This amendment will take some of the Doge and Elon Musk cuts to foreign aid and incorporate them into the spending. If you don't incorporate them into the spending, there's sort of this false hope that, gosh, we're doing all these great things, and Secretary Rubio has cut 83% of the grants to foreign aid, and you think, oh my goodness, this is wonderful. Well, it's only real if it comes back in the form of a spending cut. If you give them the same amount of money, or if it's spent somewhere else, we haven't really done our job. So the administration can send it back as a rescission package, which is a special privileged vehicle that is a simple majority vote, or we can actually do it through this budgetary process and just start reducing spending. So I'll have an amendment, and it'll be interesting to see how people vote. I can tell you how it likely will turn out. No Democrat will vote to cut 1 penny of spending, and that is largely true of every vote that I've ever taken up here or presented. Every amendment that I've ever presented to cut any spending, no Democrat has ever supported. So that's just a given. On the Republican side, though, instead of having a unanimous support for my amendment, I'll get about half or maybe slightly more than half of the caucus. But this is the dilemma we face, that there's a lot of great talk. There's a lot of great exposure of waste. But unless we can actually get Republicans in Congress to support the president, support Elon Musk, and vote to codify this into real legislation, the cuts become ephemeral and I think float away.
What is the motivation, behind the scenes when you talk to your colleagues who for years have said, yeah, cut government spending, I'm all about this, shrink government, but we can't do it right now because maybe Democrats control the presidency or one of the houses or something. We'll do it in the future, and we got to win one more election, and then we'll do it. I mean, now or never, guys. What are they saying to justify delaying yet again to a point where we know it'll never happen?
Republicans are for cutting spending in the abstract or in the general. So as a general rule, therefore, the balanced budget amendment to the Constitution, if they're forced to vote on that, they'll all vote for it. And yet, when it comes to the particular, when it comes to the specific cuts, they're just not. There's already probably 10 members of the U.S. Senate Republican caucus who will not vote to shift any of the burden of Medicaid entitlements to the states, to have the states pay more of their fair share, which is really a mild or a moderate proposal that has to happen if you're going to save any money. We already know that, we don't know yet, but we will know in a few hours or today or tomorrow, when my amendment goes forward on foreign aid, it doesn't cut all foreign aid, it simply cuts the foreign aid that Secretary Rubio has put forward. And if we find that, a dozen or 20 Republican members will not vote to cut any foreign aid, we've got a real problem. But, I've been putting up foreign aid to cut for years now, and it typically loses all Democrats, but it typically loses a third to a half of the Republicans. This is a real rub. They are in general for balancing budgets, but in particular, they're not. In other words, it's hypocrisy and lack of having enough on the Republican side to actually do it. But I continue to fight for this because we're now spending $1 trillion in interest. Somebody's got to push back.
Senator, thank you. A couple of things. First of all, when you mentioned moving Medicaid to the states, the problem that some of us have with that, of course, is how often payments such as that are moved to the states and the states do not decide to use it for the purposes that the funds were intended. But my question to you is, before Trump became president, there were over 23,000 Kentuckians who were working for federal agencies. With 200,000 now having been fired federally, do you believe that those who lost their jobs, who are Kentuckians, will your state economy be able to absorb these people?
On the first part of the question on Medicaid, shifting the burden more to the states, the reason you have to do this is because the federal government acts as if they have unlimited resources. We have the Federal Reserve, and we simply just buy our debt. And that's with the federal government paying 90% of Medicaid and the states paying 10% on the Medicaid expansion since 2010. If we shifted that to a 50-50 burden, what it does is it shifts the incentives and gives an incentive to the state government to more wisely spend the money and more frugally spend the money because they don't have a printing press. So anytime you can shift taxes or burden or spending from federal to state or to local, it's a good thing because most of your local entities are inherently fiscally more responsible because they simply spend what comes in. If you talk to the county judge executive in Kentucky, they spend what comes in. Now, with regard to employment, I don't think it's unreasonable to ask people to put down what they did for the last week. Tell me 5 things you did last week for your employment. I think that if your job is to spend $3 million of State Department money on girl-centric climate change in Brazil, I think we can eliminate your job. If your job is to dispense $2 million to do sex change operations in Guatemala, I think we can get rid of your job. If your job is to spend $4.8 million on social media influencers in Ukraine, I think we can afford to do without your services. Now, I think as we go through this, some of the people will be let go and some will be rehired. But we're not finding out about this waste unless you have somebody who is a bull in a china shop, like Elon Musk, who's willing to crack open the secrecy and the veneer of government and find out what's there. So you don't find many Democrats now supporting and saying, oh, we absolutely have to have $2 million for those sex changes in Guatemala. They're very quiet on that. But what they would prefer is they said, oh, you found this waste, move it over and spend it somewhere else. But the reason it needs to go back to the Treasury and why the workforce needs to shrink is because we have a $2 trillion deficit. And I'm not arguing for no government. We bring in $5 trillion in revenue. I'd be satisfied with a $5 trillion government. That's still a pretty big government. That still would employ a lot of federal workers. But you can't employ $7 trillion worth of workers and bring in $5 trillion. That is a mismatch that will ultimately lead to the ruin of the country.
One more thing for you, Senator Paul. You have been outspoken on how tariffs will end up, hurting American workers, American consumers. I saw many congressional Republicans were just willing to vote to give up their own power to have any oversight over tariff policy. The markets have reacted very negatively to some of this being done. What is your pitch to, people? I guess President Trump himself and other leaders of the MAGA coalition and America First coalition that nevertheless came to power because of the need to correct the Biden economy, doing some of these things that are just taxes by any other name, are they not?
I haven't had a single business person or individual in my state come up to me and say the tariffs are a good idea. I have had people come up, farmers, which are a big presence in our state, and say that they export 20 to 25% of their products and this will hurt them. They're still suffering from some of the tariffs and the retaliation from 2018 and 2019 when the previous Trump administration did tariffs. I have home builders and real estate brokers who come to me and say, if the price of lumber goes up, if the price of steel goes up, the prices of homes will go up and we'll sell less homes. I have the bourbon distillers coming to me, which is a big industry in my state, and they say, well, the retaliation that Europe is placing on us and Canada is placing on us on our bourbon, we'll export less bourbon. So we have shippers in our state, people who ship internationally as well as across the U.S. They are worried that their shipping will go down as well. So I really haven't had anybody come to me and say, please, please put tariffs on us. We have car manufacturers. We make the Corvette, we make the Toyota Camry, we make the Explorer 100. So we have 3 different major car companies, and they are all saying that car prices will go through the roof. Some are saying $9,000 to $10,000 increase. So it's funny how they're so popular, because the president is popular and he's a popular salesman. But the thing is the economic fallacy of tariffs will become readily apparent. The marketplace understands this. If you look at graphs and comparisons of international trade over the last 5 decades and GDP, they're proportional. The more trade, the higher the GDP for all countries. If you look at the elimination of poverty around the world, the number one driver of that is trade. 100,000 people every day are coming out of poverty because of trade. If we become insular, each country only trading among its borders, the progress on poverty that we've made over the last decades will evaporate.
You agree with that, Marianne?
Absolutely. And obviously what we all want, of course, is the eradication of poverty. I want to go specifically into the issue of poverty in Kentucky. I understand the general conversation and argument that you have about DOGE. Going back, though, to the people in Kentucky who were working for the federal government, there's no indication that any of them were part of sex change operations in Guatemala. These are people who've worked for parks, medical research, prisons, etc. So once again, is there a way for the economy in Kentucky to absorb these people who will now need jobs?
Well, I think we have to look at every job individually. So, for example, Mammoth Park is about 45 miles north of me. It's a national park. I'm not for firing anybody at the national parks. I'm not aware that they are being fired, and if they are, we'll look at that and we will protest that. But as far as overall government hiring, overall employment, we have to have a smaller workforce. And so you can't just say in general, what about 23,000 people? You'd have to say, what about this position? What is their job and how many people do the job? If you have 10 people doing the job of one person, you're going to have 9. It isn't about where they're from or the parochial interest. It's about how many are the fewest number of people we need, because we're spending $7 trillion and bringing in $5 trillion. So it is about the overall picture. It can't be, oh, what do you think about these workers? What I think about is what's happening to the country. What I'm thinking about is a $2 trillion deficit this year on top of $36 trillion. We're going to be approaching 40 within about a year. So this is unsustainable, and nobody has a malicious wish towards workers. We want the workers that are doing their job to keep their job, and I'll always fight for that. But I can't do it in the context of saying, oh, we just must keep everyone. Government has to get smaller, and so we have to look everywhere and try to make the federal government smaller.
And unlike so many of your colleagues, you have a plan to actually do that you're willing to vote for. Senator Paul, it is always such a pleasure to have you on Rising to talk through some of these issues. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you.
Up next, Bill Maher has a stunning prediction for the Democratic Party. Stay tuned. Bill Maher on his Club Random podcast brought up an unlikely name from the past. Maher's conversation with Trump supporter Kid Rock went back in time to 2020 and then winner Joe Biden. Let's watch.
I know what happened. Joe Biden won an election. That's what happened.
Just because, no, there was COVID going on. There was all sorts of horror going on.
What that
They use that as a disguise. I don't know
But he
exactly.
won the
Just because you don't get caught doesn't not make it a crime.
Oh, Bob, you lose me when you go there because it's been adjudicated. It's like give up on that one. It's
There's people going to jail that got convicted by 12 of their fucking peers. They're innocent.
Irrelevant.
Happens all the time.
Irrelevant to this point and this discussion. But sweetheart, it's actually a better story this way because it's a trilogy. He wins the election, then there has to be an act 2 where the hero is wandering in the wilderness before you have act 3. So it's better that he lost. Joe Biden did him a favor. He's more legendary because he came back. And
there's no question to that.
Maher also made some predictions about the future of the Democratic Party. Let's watch.
Janie?
You can't. It's just he lost an
Liz
election.
Cheney?
Not everyone. Was everyone a hit record? Was everyone a hit record? No. But, does every one of my jokes land? No. You lose a few. And it's just a better story, and it would make me breathe a lot easier, because I'm not sure that this crowd is ever going to give, I don't know if we'll ever see a Democrat president again, because I just don't think they are of a mind that can happen without it ruining the country. So they convince themselves they have to do it. They don't want to do it. They just have to do it.
While talking about the failures of the Democrats, Maher, of course, mentioned Kamala Harris. Let's watch.
The Democrats draw the line at when they lose an election, they just quit. They quit quick. I mean, Kamala Harris was in the Bahamas on Thursday. I mean, they just okay, we lost, get out of town. See you, we'll try again next year, no big deal.
I don't think the Democrats are doomed necessarily to never win an election. They won an election 4 years ago, despite what Kid Rock seems to think there. Things go back and forth. It's a close country. Donald Trump did win the popular vote for the first time for a Republican in a long time, so it is a big victory, but still pretty close. We're talking about a handful of undecided go back and forth voters in 2 states, and so they could win again. However, they are in a bad shape because they don't have as appealing or charismatic or commanding a figure as Donald Trump. Now, neither will the Republicans in 4 years, so we'll see.
I don't think that Donald Trump would have ever been president again had the Democratic elite establishment not suppressed democracy in 2024. As you know, we didn't have a real primary. They de-amplified any candidates other than the president. They felt that the threat to democracy posed by Trump was so great that they were entitled to suppress democracy in our own house. So what happened was that there was a year and a half when the Republicans were having debates, when the Republicans were having CNN town halls, when all of the oxygen was the Republicans talking about their ideas for the country. Meanwhile, any conversation the Democrats wanted to have, particularly conversations about the unequivocal advocacy for the working people of the United States, was squelched by the Democratic elite, by the DNC. That's the old DNC leadership. I hope the new will be different. So when you say we don't have a charismatic voice, I think we have a lot of charismatic voices, but none of the traditional people would show up for the primary in 2024 because they were afraid of the DNC. And those of us who were not afraid of the DNC got everything that those who were afraid of, why they were afraid. I saw what the DNC would do. The DNC was wrong. The traditional Democratic voters who went along with that in their own codependent stupor, whatever they say, we're going with Biden, we're going with Biden. I hope that they are broken free from that. It's our own cult-like behavior at times. And we'll be back in 2024. I don't know if it will be a Democrat or it will be a third-party candidate, but I will tell you this. The American 2028. The American people will not stand for this. The American people see what's happening. We'll be back strong in 2026 unless Musk is going to do something crazy with the machines, which I don't put past him.
What do you mean by that?
Well, I mean, even the president had mentioned things about the Elon with the machines in Pennsylvania.
Oh, now we're going to hear voter fraud allegations.
I don't
from
trust your side when
How
it comes to voter suppression, but I do know this. Everyone, not just Democrats. This is not just about Democrats versus Republicans. This is about Americans. And I think the American people in 2026 are going to do whatever it takes to make sure that their votes are counted, their voices are heard, and we will be at the very least getting back to House of Representatives in 2026.
Yeah, you might. What do you make of Kamala Harris's intention, it seems, to remain on the political scene? I think she wants to be the candidate yet again.
Well, they say she might run for governor of California. I don't know.
And then she's going to run for president.
Political gossip is not my thing.
Yeah.
And particularly political gossip about people who I feel need to move over and let new voices in. So
no, I think she should move over, but I don't think she's going to.
She was part, what'd you say?
I don't think she is going to move over. She should. You're
well,
right.
she has a right to do what she wants to do, but everybody else has a right to do what we want to do as well. And my hope would be that the Democratic Party will have learned from its past and will not suppress any voices but their own little club.
Up next, what is technofascism? We will speak to a guest, and I will probably argue with them about that. Stay tuned.
Technofascism is a new term referring to how political rights are only gained by technical expertise. And in recent years, Silicon Valley and San Francisco area tech bros have been shifting their gaze east, with their sights set on Washington, D.C. Just look at President Trump's inauguration. Tech giants Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, Mark Zuckerberg, to name a few, doled out $250 million to support the incoming president. Joining us now to discuss how techno-fascism is playing out before our eyes is journalist Gil Duran. He began his career as a janitor, worked his way up to become former California Governor Jerry Brown's press secretary. He then went on to become an opinion editor for the Sacramento Bee and editorial page editor for the San Francisco Examiner. Welcome, Gil.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, Curtis Yarvin is not yet a household name in the United States, but he's quickly becoming so. People are understanding, largely because of your reporting, that this is a man who said Americans need to not be so afraid of dictators, that we need a post-constitutional era. We know that Peter Thiel and others started funding him, becoming excited by him, and now it's an entire movement that many claim Elon Musk is basically a front for. Could you please give us the background here? What has happened?
Well, a couple of years ago, I started paying attention to some of the things that some of these tech guys in San Francisco were saying on their podcasts, were saying in conferences, were writing in books. And I became aware, and many others were already aware of this, of something called the neo-reactionary movement, which is a movement that seeks to push the politics of the United States far to the right, which sees democracy as an impingement on freedom, and which kind of embraces a bunch of old school sort of fascist authoritarian ideas about how the world should work. Some people call this, by the way, the Dark Enlightenment. And the closer I looked at it, the more I saw that some very influential people, some very wealthy people, had pretty much openly embraced some of these ideas and were pushing to have them adopted in California government. They were trying to take over the city of San Francisco, pushing for sort of to build this new enclave 60 miles north of San Francisco. And so I kind of discovered that this had become an idea that has most recently been branded as something called the network state. And so I focused on that and saw that there was a handful of tech billionaires who had some very strange ideas about a post-democratic United States and a post-democracy world. And unfortunately, in 2025, a lot of these same characters seem to be carrying out all the things that they talked about in the federal government in Washington, D.C.
Well, when you talk about a post-democratic world, this should not be something that is embraced on the right any more than it should be embraced on the left. So are we talking about people, and where do you see Elon Musk in all of this? Is Elon Musk someone who believes that democracy is simply not an efficient way to govern America? And are these people basically out when the time is right to abolish the U.S. Constitution?
Well, I think we see challenges to the Constitution every single day under this administration. We have an unelected billionaire basically in charge of our government, making it clear he's going to challenge rules, challenge laws, challenge tradition. And I agree with you. I don't think Republicans should be comfortable with this either. But as we know, for the past few years, there's been a very hardcore far-right base in MAGA that's been pushing Republicans, base Republicans, to be more open to authoritarianism and dictatorship. We've seen that reflected in polls. There's a percentage of Americans who believe that dictatorship or authoritarianism are preferable. So I think it's an attempt to shift the so-called Overton window and make it so that these kinds of things are not something we can't talk about. You're talking about people like Peter Thiel, Mark Andreessen, who have openly embraced the idea that we need a national government structure that is not the United States of America, that we have to create our own countries ruled by tech zillionaires. You see this in this new Freedom Cities idea Trump has been pushing. This movement called the Network State, which anyone can Google and find out more about. There's an entire book that one of its main evangelists wrote, and it's available for free to read online, calls for the creation of these new corporate-controlled territories all over the country and all over the world. Well, that's what Trump's talking about when he says so-called freedom cities, which I think would be better described as fascist cities. And in addition, they're trying to build these things all over the world. Sam Altman, Mark Andreessen, Peter Thiel are investors in something called Praxis, which is trying to build a post-nation state country somewhere in the Mediterranean, or maybe the CEO says in Greenland. So I would urge people to pay closer attention to this stuff. I know it sounds really weird and kind of conspiratorial, but you're dealing with some very weird, very rich people, and they currently have their fingers around the throat of the American government.
It sounds exciting to me. I want to live on a platform in the middle of the ocean designed by smart tech people. Look, I've met a lot of the people you're referring to. I've met Curtis Yarvin before. I think he would describe his own views as the person who wins the election should then be allowed to implement their agenda. I don't know if that's anti-democratic. He was, in fact, by the way, he endorsed Kamala Harris. He supported Kamala Harris over Donald Trump, wanted her to win the election, and thought then Democrats should, like a new CEO coming in, implement their vision. And if the shareholders of the company of America don't like it, then they can vote out the next person. So I think it's interesting to describe this as anti-democratic. I mean, Elon is advising Trump, and then Trump is going to implement these policies or have Congress implement these policies. Is that really anti-democratic? I mean, Donald Trump, not only he won the Electoral College and the popular vote.
You may have met Curtis Yarvin, but it doesn't sound like you've read Curtis Yarvin. Curtis Yarvin literally said if Americans want to change their government, they need to get over their dictator phobia. So I would encourage you to read that before you try to debate me on this.
Is it true that Curtis
There's
Yarvin...
a lot he's written since 2005.
I mean, I have read him, I've met him, I've talked with him. He thinks that, yes, the president should implement their vision and should not be hamstrung by the permanent federal bureaucracy that is itself not democratically elected whatsoever. People on the other side, I guess the other side from me, act like it's democracy to have a unelected bureaucracy make all the decisions for us and plan all the regulations, and that is somehow democratic, even when the will of the American people is to not have many of these policies, to not have many of these spending packages, but it's contrary to democracy to have the actual person elected by the people clean some of that out.
Well, the people also elect Congress and the Senate to work with the White House and with the Supreme Court in a very careful balance of powers to make these determinations. They don't hire one president to be a dictator and install a CEO to start gutting the government that's been built over generations and generations of American history. So again, I would encourage you to spend a little more time with the works of Yarvin before you try to debate whether he's saying what he's very clearly saying, what even he doesn't dispute he's saying. Yeah, I mean, that's all I can really say. This is not really a debate.
Do you believe that the things that are going on right now are part of the plan that they have been articulating for years now? Do you think it's going well in their mind? And what do you see happening coming up in the months and years ahead?
Well, it does seem to be all the stuff they're talking about. Look, I'm a rational, reasonable guy. Maybe it's all a coincidence that they've been talking about doing this stuff, gutting the government, purging a bureaucracy of pro-democracy people, making sure that everyone in the government is loyal only to the president, not to the law, not to the any other factors. But it seems that there's some dissent and some tension because Curtis Yarvin seems very upset. He thinks Elon's chaos is going to blow the whole thing. He wrote a very long essay last week on Substack where he basically said he thinks that it's not going well and it's going to be a bad deal. And in addition to that, you have Steve Bannon attacking Musk. And you have others who are kind of, there's a guy named John Robb, who's a military analyst who writes about this stuff. And he basically thinks it's going to devolve into chaos. Elon's moving too fast and the American people didn't vote for this. So I don't think it's going too well. But again, I don't underestimate these guys. They have a tremendous amount of money and they seem extremely dedicated to getting this done. You know, a lot of people think this is about money or regulations, but look at how the market is tanking. Look at how Tesla is tanking. Clearly, these guys don't care about the money. They're after something else, and that's power.
And the destruction of American democracy as we know it. They don't find it efficient. So thank you very much, Gil. You're someone who is informing us and educating us, and I know I will continue to read you and listen to you, and I think many more people will be. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you both for having me.
Next up, Trump is appearing to buy a Tesla himself. We will discuss. Stay tuned. Tesla has literally been on fire over the last several weeks. Several Tesla charging stations were set on fire outside Boston. And in Seattle, a fire damaged 4 Tesla Cybertrucks, and protesters were arrested at a demonstration at a Tesla dealership in Lower Manhattan.
Shots were even fired at a Tesla dealership in Oregon, with chanting, "Elon Musk has to go."
All of this has been part of a series of attacks against Tesla since Elon Musk became an advisor to President Trump. Tesla stocks have taken a hit here and abroad. Despite that hate, Musk's marquee brand was given a boost Tuesday after falling over 15% on Monday. President Trump did appear with his senior advisor at the White House to select a new Tesla for himself and for his staff. Let's watch.
Well, I'm going to buy, and I'm going to buy because, number one, it's a great product, as good as it gets, and number two, because this man has devoted his energy and his life to doing this, and I think he's been treated very unfairly by a very small group of people. And I just want people to know that you can't be penalized for being a patriot, and he's a great patriot. And he's also done an incredible job with Tesla, and I mean, nobody else has a car company started up in the last 30 years that's been successful. I don't think so. And not only successful, but super successful. And because he's able to find billions and billions and billions of dollars of fraud and waste and all of the things. I mean, our country is going to be very strong very soon because of a lot of the things that he's done and a lot of the things that I'm doing.
Trump has been critical of electric cars in the past, and many are questioning his move now to turn the White House lawn into a Tesla showroom. Late-night host Jimmy Kimmel had this to say. Let's watch.
This is not a good time to own a Tesla vehicle. There have been a lot of reports of angry Americans vandalizing Teslas, vandalizing charging stations, attacking the showroom, so much so that President Trump today took it upon himself to announce he will be buying a Tesla, even though he's not allowed to drive a car. That should turn things around. I remember the time he saved Party City by buying a kazoo. It was heroic. But it makes sense because Trump, as you know, has been a long-time supporter of electric cars.
We are a nation whose leaders are demanding all electric cars, even though they can't go far, cost too much, and whose batteries are produced in China with materials only available in China.
He flip-flops from 0 to 60 in under 5 seconds. It's really a thing of beauty. What a twist. Watching Donald Trump check out a Tesla, it was like watching a monkey with an iPad.
Wow, this is a different panel than I've had. Everything's computer.
Stephen Colbert also had some things to say.
All of this was to shore up Elon's fading brand, and Trump almost got the name right.
I love Tesla.
All of that. And you end it with, I love Tesla. But you know what? It's an honest mistake. He just mixed up the two words most associated with Elon Musk, Tesla and Hitler.
Oh, har, har, har.
Well, politicians sure do have a way of changing their minds, don't they?
They do, and that includes the Democrats, all of whom were trying to force electric cars on us for years as the solution to rising gas prices. Do you remember that? When the voters are saying gas prices are too high, and everyone said, oh, just get a Tesla. Multiple Democrats said, buy an electric vehicle instead of dealing with car prices. But now that electric vehicles are associated with someone with conservative political views, it's suddenly bad and evil, and they're sending deranged activists to set the plants on fire.
Democrats
hate conservatives so much that they're now willing to set on fire places where the cars are built and charged.
Can't let that go, Robby. Democrats didn't set his cars on fire.
Well, these are
some people set his cars on fire. Come on. What happened was that the Democrats used to support Tesla when Elon Musk seemed like this really cool guy, and yes, we were trying to...
When he was silent and supportive of their policies.
Well, that's kind of true. But hold on a second.
Thank you.
But the policies that we liked was diminishing America's reliance on oil. Yes, and now, because of his activity with Doge, et cetera, many people are unhappy. Don't say that the Democrats support violent acts of arson and so forth. So just don't even go
The Democratic Party, no.
The president,
but the
and also
doing
it is
are
illegal what the president did. And you know there were all these calls coming in.
What was illegal?
It is
buying
illegal.
a Tesla?
No, for the president to use the South Lawn of the United States of the White House for that kind of behavior. There were phone calls. I think so. Actually, there was something about. Well, I know that there's something. Hold on. The phone calls that were coming in yesterday to Susie Wiles and others, Ludnick and so forth, were from the head of car companies. You know, the big three in Detroit. Excuse me, Why is it okay for the president to be giving this ad for Tesla rather than for Ford, rather than for Chevrolet, and so forth? So we are now in a situation where the president just will do whatever it takes.
Well, I'd love Trump to do an advertisement for Rising, but I don't think it violates the law if he
well, no,
does
there
an
is a law
advertisement
about
for
using
Breaking
it for
Points
political
instead.
purposes, for using the White House to promote your own political agenda, your own political, not just your agenda, but your own political prospects. So it could be seen. But they have fired anybody in any kind of ethics offices. They have fired anyone who would hold them to account for any of this stuff. So it is what it is, and the American people can see it for what it is, yeah, it is what it is.
And all the
but it won't be the way it is for
hate
much
electric
longer.
vehicles now,
What'd you
and
say?
they're all about making fun of Tesla when they were shoving them down our throats for years and years and years.
We wanted
were
to
being
end
shoved down
America's reliance on oil.
Well, and we still do. And now Trump is promoting that, and it's bad all of a sudden.
No, that's
Trump
not.
Trump-
You're
isn't
putting
that
all
Trump
kinds of
derangement
things
syndrome?
together.
Is it
No,
not Trump derangement
fossil
syndrome?
fuel extraction is very, very bad for the environment.
agree.
And for that reason, we supported electric cars. And at that time, remember, Richard Nixon was a Republican president. He founded the EPA. There was a time when there were environmentalists within the Republican Party. It should not be a Democratic and Republican
evil
issue.
organization that should be
Pardon?
destroyed. And
Oh,
put out
EPA is an
entirely,
evil
but
organization? You heard
Richard
it,
Nixon
everybody.
is
EPA.
now a conservative hero of mine.
You know, I don't care what your politics are, you have to breathe. I don't care what your politics are, it's going to hurt your economics and your health if these terrible consequences in terms of the weather continue to catastrophically unfold. It's going to harm your grandchildren. So I don't care what your politics are. Why would you be against the Environmental Protection Agency?
Because it is crippling for the economy of this country. It makes it impossible to build new homes, build new factories. It violates people's own property rights by discovering, endangered animals in their backyard, they can't do anything. It is an attack on building things in America. Yes, we should promote environmental health and good quality. I agree with that. And yes, the common areas, like our waterways, public park, have to be preserved for common use. I agree with that. We can't ask Americans, however, to pay more or to have worse experiences with using the laundry, all those kinds of environmental standards, or gas stove. You take away things Americans like, take colder shower. All of that is nonsense. We can't be asked to do that while China is still polluting as much as it wants. Most of the environmental degradation is coming from developing countries. It can't all fall on us to live worse and more miserable lives while our rivals continue to pollute.
Do you mean this, or is it just for TV?
No, I mean
that
that
you
absolutely.
will not come up with any level of consensus and balance and both and. I really wonder that, because nobody wants these kinds of extremes. But
no, I'm for moving, but I'm for. We don't need an unaccountable environmental agency to do it. But I agree about moving away from what you were saying about moving away from fossil fuels. Yes, no, I agree with that. Now, I think nuclear is actually an important part of the solution, which I know makes some, maybe not, I don't know what your views on it are, but some people
I think it's a conversation that is nuanced, and it's a conversation we need to have.
I think moving away from Europe, moving away from it was a big mistake, because now they're reliant on Russian gas and oil.
It's not that I don't trust the technology, because I understand that we have the technology now that makes it safe. The problem I have is with human beings. And remember, DOGE, part of what they're doing already is stripping our nuclear facilities, stripping people who run them, who know what to do, the experts. The way the government is behaving right now, the last thing I want to do is to have more nuclear power in the hands of crazy, reckless, irresponsible, DOGE-type rampagers who think that we don't need experts and people who really know what they're doing to run things.
Do you know, you live in D.C. as well, as do I. Mm-hmm. Do you know how difficult it is to get permission from the local government in D.C. to put solar panels on your own house in order to have cleaner energy? It is annoying, difficult, cumbersome regulation that makes on your own house to put solar panels, to become greener, to become cleaner. That's what I'm talking about, regulation getting in the way. Prevent it. So I want to clear out.
All regulations you'd like to clear out.
Well, all regulations I would basically like to clear out, but some of those regulations you should agree that get in the way of people making greener, better choices for themselves.
Listen.
Bureaucratic experts, they don't know anything.
That's
in
just
so many
ridiculous to say
cases.
bureaucratic experts don't know anything. No, it's Elon Musk who doesn't know anything about government. You have such a problem with unelected bureaucrats.
But he knows how to
Many of
run
the
things and make them more efficient
No,
and better. He clearly does.
He does not.
He's
know
sending a
government.
rocket to go rescue the astronauts.
I don't care. You don't feed a hungry child because it's efficient. You feed a hungry child because it's the right thing to do. The U.S. government is not a business.
But we
Profit
find-
is not our
no, we
bottom
did-
line.
but we did-
The American people
we
thrive
designed-
is our bottom line.
We design better systems to feed more hungry people all over the world. Just as Rand Paul was saying in our interview, which I know you don't actually even agree with, because you're for more trade and getting rid of some of these tariffs. The big driver of progress, of reduction of starvation, reduction of poverty in the last 100 years has been introduction of more market concepts, more trade-based concepts to India, China, and the rest. Most of human history has been crippling poverty and violence and starvation, and then you get trade where where the profit incentive, the incentive for us to benefit from each other economically, drives the end of starvation. That's a good thing, and we must design those
12,000
mechanisms.
children are starving on this planet every day.
Right.
So obviously, trade alone
fewer.
is not the. I don't care that it's fewer.
But the trajectory
12,000
is-
children. No, obviously, trade alone is not the answer. These are big both-and situations. I do not see corporate profit as the bottom line. I see that we love each other. That is meant to be our bottom line. That we take care of each other. I believe in a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. Efficiency itself. My God, Auschwitz was efficient. And to have someone, you know, it's interesting. You've done it here today as well. There's a lot of this sneer around unelected bureaucrats. When many of the unelected bureaucrats that you're talking about are experts, people who have been in these programs, who have dedicated their lives to these programs. All of a sudden, this one man comes along, an unelected expert, and he's not even an expert in these agencies that he's destroying. He's an expert in how to run a certain kind of business, and he's ketamine fueled, and all you have to do is listen to him.
Well, he should
and see
lay
that
off.
these guys,
Trust
they
me,
would
he
say
should
in
lay
the-
off the ketamine.
Pardon?
Lay off
Yeah,
the
no,
ketamine
this is not a
good
joke. This
advice
is not
I
a
give
joke. This
people,
is
but-
chaotic. This is destructive. They are gutting federal agencies. They are gutting really the operation of the U.S. government. And I'm all for righteous profit. I'm all for righteous trade. But this idea that somebody making money in an immediate sense is the bottom line of how we govern ourselves, no, that is not the bottom line. The bottom line to me is democracy and humanitarian values. I think God asks us to be good people, and we should think of ourselves as trying to be a good nation as well. And good doesn't just mean that a bunch of billionaires make money fast.
There are some services the government must provide, should provide. We voted for them to provide, regardless of if it can be made profitable for the bare bones of the government in terms of providing court services and police services and et cetera. Yes, it will not exactly be run by a business.
Yeah,
but
well, there are
I
also
would
things
turn
where the
back.
So you'd be okay with getting rid of Social Security and Medicaid, wouldn't you?
Absolutely.
Oh my God! Okay, come back tomorrow, everybody, because you need to listen to this.
I think I should opt.
Wait, let me ask you.
You should be able to opt out of paying for it.
Oh God!
That's
okay,
what I
so
would
let me
do.
ask. That means
Because
the
I believe in
destruction of
human
it.
freedom.
That means the destruction of it.
I won't
Let me
put a
ask you
gun to
this.
your head and say
Are
you must fork over money now that you will never
Yes,
get back.
We
I
know
am
how. Yeah, we
against
know
that.
the
It's
argument. So let me
coercive.
ask you this: what about democracy itself? How do you feel about democracy itself?
Democracy itself is the best system we have available, but there are some things we don't put to a vote, Marianne. Fundamental free speech rights, it's in the First Amendment. It's in our founding documents. It doesn't matter if 55, 60, 70, 80% say that your hateful speech should be illegal. We don't care. There are some things that don't get put to a vote.
No, I
free
agree with
speech
you.
doesn't get put to
I
a vote.
agree with
Religious
you.
freedom.
So I should have said, how about the Constitution? So you
I'm
seem to be arguing.
fully in support of our
Well, if you're
Constitution.
for the
I love our
Constitution,
Constitution.
then you are for the three co-equal branches of government, and
Yes.
you do not see the president as a dictator,
I do
and you
not.
see the president as working. You know, you keep saying he was elected, he was elected. He was elected, yes, but still to work within the context, within the purview of the law. That's
All that
why
I
the
agree
fact
with.
that the Supreme
All that I
Court
agree with.
gave him immunity from prosecution.
I did not agree with that decision.
I'm glad you didn't, and that's why he's acting like a madman, because he knows no one will hold him accountable.
Yeah,
But
I
the
think
American
it is
people will
dangerous
hold
to
him
give
accountable,
not
hopefully,
even
in
this particular
2026.
president, but the office of the presidency so much protection from scrutiny was, I think, a bad thing.
Absolutely, it's a bad thing.
Yeah.
The president is the no
See,
man
I'm
is
reasonable,
supposed to be
Marianne.
above the law. What'd you say?
I'm reasonable, Marianne.
It was that, yeah. You definitely are. Okay.
That does it for us today on Rising. Please be sure to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss any of our content. And for those of you who like to listen while on the go, we're now available anywhere you can find podcasts. Thanks so much for watching. Let us know how you feel about our show, and I'll see you back here tomorrow.